Hello, I'm Skid from the Widescreen Gaming Forum. Today I'm going to be having a look at just how much of an advantage a multi-monitor, or more specifically a triple monitor setup, gives in strategy games like StarCraft 2 and MOBA games like League of Legends and DotA. Basically, the reason that I wanted to create this video was because I've seen sweeping arguments from one side and then no real attempt from our side to sort of like explain how this works and sort of like properly try and argue it. The only videos I've seen are people ranting about the issue. So I'm going to try and take a more balanced approach on this. So I'm going to go into detail effectively how a multi-monitor system works in a game like this, and also I'll then, after explaining it, go into what I think and why. Now, before I begin, a quick note to anyone that's watching on a triple monitor setup. YouTube, as far as I'm aware, is still being a pain in the ass. So if you're trying to find the original 4K resolution and you're not finding it and you can't get access to it, then have a look in the description. There'll be some information at the bottom. Now, before I begin the actual video, some quick disclaimers. Firstly, as you can probably tell, I have a multi-monitor system, so my actual opinion is biased towards it. I'm going to try and keep this as balanced as I can, and basically the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to explain what advantages a multi-monitor system has, what disadvantages it has, try and give a proper indication to people with single monitor setups, effectively what this looks like for me and how it works for me. Then after that, I will then look at whether or not the advantages given can be reasonably considered as an unfair advantage. Secondly, as you probably saw a second ago, I am loading a replay. This isn't a particularly good replay. I think I've played a total of 10 games. I lost all 5 of my placement matches, and then I won all 5 of my Bronze League matches. This is my second Bronze League match. The reason I'm using a replay is partly so I don't have to focus on the gameplay and I can just try and get the points across, but also because StarCraft doesn't actually allow this resolution in the options. I'm having to use an external fix that basically changes the resolution once the game is launched. Now, Blizzard have specifically stated that they consider this an unfair advantage, which is one of the reasons why I'm making this video. But I'm using it on a replay. I've never used it on any of my single player games. My single player games were all played on a single monitor, so I'm hoping they're not going to try and ban me for it. They'll be very, very mean if they do. And the last note, I made mention and I have tagged MOBA games like League of Legends and DotA. Now, the reason for this is not because they have similar mechanics, it's because they handle camera control and the way the game is displayed similarly. They all use isometric displays, so it's all top-down or this sort of like view. They all have mini-maps, they all have a HUD that's spanned around the edges. They all have fogs of war, so basically how they present the game world is very much similar, which is why I've grouped them together. So, with that out of the way, let's get on with the obvious stuff. Does a multi-monitor system give an advantage? Yes. The main advantage, as you can probably see from this, I can see more, or there is more screen rendered. In the case of this game, it is around about 3 times. If I just break the mouse away from my camera here, my center monitor is around about here to here. So if we look here, that little notch there, that's where my monitor ends. So if I scroll this over, then I see the edge of this hook here. That's again where it is. So if I scroll back, put it around about where it was, then yeah, there's the hook there. So I can see a little over 3 times. Now, how much I can actually see extra will depend upon the game. It will depend effectively on the field of view of the game, the position of the camera. Now, it's not simply a matter of the fact that this game is rendering 3 times more, therefore I can see 3 times more. There's multiple reasons for that. The most trivial of which are effectively the way the map is laid out. If you look at the position here on my right hand side over here, there is absolutely nothing. Also, there's not very much over here, and I can only just see part of that. Other reasons why it's not quite that simple is effectively the fog of war. So I can only actually see things moving in here. Everything else is just blank. It's just the terrain. However, the more important reasons as to why it's not simply a matter that I can see 3 times more comes down to the position in the monitors and how your eyes actually work. Now, anyone with a single monitor system, basically if you have a triple monitor system, all you're doing is adding one monitor directly to the left and one monitor directly to the right. So your focus will typically be on the center monitor or one of the monitors, and then everything else is effectively in your peripheral vision. Which brings us to the second point. The vast majority of what you can see is in your peripheral vision. Now that's important, and the reason that's important is best shown by an example. Now, if you hold out your hand and put it, let me just break the camera away a second. If you hold out your hand and put it to the left or right of your monitor, and then look at my nexus. Keep your eyes focused on the nexus, and keep looking at the nexus. Now, without turning your eyes away to look at your hand, how much detail can you actually see on the back of your hand? If you're being truthful and you don't have absurdly small monitors, the answer should be not a lot. And the reason for that is that the human eye is only capable of picking up detail in a small cone of vision directly in front of you. Now, the reason that's important is because effectively, even with my camera, or even with all of this extra view, the vast majority of it you can't actually see detail in. All you can see is effectively blurs and smudges. If you want to see any detail in it, you have to turn your head to look at it, which takes your attention away from what you're doing in the center. Now, that's both a good and a bad thing. We'll first explain effectively what the advantages of peripheral vision. Now, as I said, the focus vision that you can see directly in front of you is where you can read detail. Your peripheral vision, however, can't see any detail. However, it's extremely good at picking up motion. So, there's not really a good example I can show you on here, but yeah. You will be able to see things moving on one of the sides. I mean, the best way to describe it is if you've ever had the feet or ever suddenly turned around because you thought you saw something moving in the corner of your eye, that's effectively your peripheral vision picking up or thinking it picks up something moving. The reason that's both a good and a bad thing is effectively because you don't necessarily actually see something, you just think you do. And because you can't see detail, you don't necessarily know what was moving until you've looked at it. So while it is an advantage, you also have the potential downside of that it can be distracting. So that's something to bear in mind. Now I'm rustling paper because I've written down a whole load of things here that I need to get through. Okay, so that explains how peripheral vision works. So the next thing to have a look at. Right, so another thing that's brought up a number of times is effectively that because you can see more, you could in theory manage multiple bases without having to move the camera. And this is technically true, but it's not strictly speaking a real advantage. If you have a look again, I mean, this is a perfect position for it. If you have a look again, I can see my base there. I'll have to break my camera away. I can see my base here, and I can see this expansion over here, but this is all warped. So it's at a funny angle. So effectively a good way of doing it is if I move over here, you can see that all of this is at a funny angle, so selecting things is a hell of a lot harder. But it is perfectly possible to manage bases from, or manage my other base from here. The maps you can do it on are dependent, so some maps you can, some maps you can't. It depends on how they're laid out. But that actually more comes as a preference rather than an actual advantage, and the reason for that, let's see if these camera commands will actually work in an observer mode. There we go. So basically, in order to actually do anything on my other base on my left hand side, sorry, my voice is going. In order to do anything on my base on my left hand side, I'll get it right eventually. I effectively have to turn my head and refocus. Now, the game comes with a set of commands that you can bind locations and switch between them with a button press. That's just as quick as turning your head to look at it. So it doesn't strictly speaking come as an advantage. It's an advantage because it gives you an option, rather than an advantage because it's a flat-out advantage. It's basically, it gives you a personal preference that you can use if you want to. The other things to note, or the final thing to note, is actually the position of the HUD. Now, this is, well, it's not a good thing, but how bad it is depends on the elements of the HUD. I mean, the main problem is that the minimap is all the way down here on the left-hand side. It is way out of the way of effectively where you want to be keeping most of your attention, the sensor monitor. The minimap is very important, so having it out the way makes it a little bit harder to use, so it's a little bit more clumsy, the fact that it's down there. It's not a massive amount more clumsy, but it is still effectively wasted time while you have to try and see what's on there and then jump back. Everything else is kind of irrelevant. I mean, everything down here, once you've memorized the hotkeys, which if you're trying to play competitive, you will be eventually memorizing them all. Excuse me. So these aren't too important. Your mineral count, once you get a certain level of play, you'll have a rough idea how many minerals you've got. Failing that, the game will actually tell you when you've run out, so that's not too much of an issue either. So that brings us back to the original point. Do these advantages collectively constitute an unfair advantage? Now, it's worth stating what is and isn't an unfair advantage. An unfair advantage isn't simply a technology or something that someone else has that you do not. That doesn't count as an unfair advantage. If it did, then high-speed mice would be banned, 120Hz monitors would be banned. Basically, any sort of technology that people use to increase their experience or make their experience better would just be outright banned. They wouldn't allow it because it's a technology that not everyone has. So what is reasonably an unfair advantage? The way I'm defining it, so bear with me here, the way I'm defining an unfair advantage is an unfair advantage is an advantage that you are given by either a technology or a piece of software or something that you're using that cannot be replicated, countered, or effectively negated by something available to everyone that's already in the game. So I'll continue. So yeah, basically an unfair advantage has to be something that gives you an outright advantage over everyone, and it has to be a significant advantage. A trivial advantage, not really so much. I mean, a trivial advantage is trivial, so it would have to be a significant advantage. So does this give a significant advantage? You could arguably say yes. The problem is there are ways to do it in the game, or ways to gain the same advantage in the game that are already available to everyone. So in that regard, it isn't an unfair advantage. So allow me to explain and expand on that. Basically, there are two systems in the game that allow you to do what a multi-monitor system lets you do, only better. And they are proper map visibility. Let me just increase the speed, there's a reason for that. Proper map visibility, and then proper use of the minimap. Now, this setup lets me see around about 3 times extra of what's just around me. So I can only see a little bit extra to the left and right. Now the minimap shows me everything. So long as I have visibility, it is on the minimap, and the minimap is easier to read than seeing in your peripheral vision and just turning to look at it. But you can see everything on the minimap that you can see on the screen, and that is why it's not an unfair advantage, because the minimap is much more powerful, and if you want to play this game or any of these games competitively at any sort of level, proper use of the minimap and getting proper map visibility is essential to not even a high level of play, just a reasonable level of play. You have to be keeping an eye on the minimap to see when you're being attacked from any particular angle. You need to make sure you have the visibility up. These are all fundamental skills that any player needs to learn. So I have a good example of that, and I've timed it roughly around about right. Now, this is why I picked this particular replay. I'm about to send 2 zealots to the Zelnaga watchtowers because I suddenly realised I can't see shit. And if he attacks me, I'm screwed because I won't necessarily see it coming. So I've just sent 2 zealots to the Zonarg watchtowers. Now, if you watch the minimap, if you remember, I was playing this on a single screen, so the minimap would have actually been more central on the central monitor. My minimap's down here. So I've literally just captured that Zonarg watchtower. And if you keep watching the minimap, there we are. There's an attack coming. And it took me 5 seconds to respond. Now, I've seen that there, so I know he's sending an attack over to me. So I'm already trying to counter it. Now, the thing is, you could argue that, well, you would see it coming when it gets to your base. But yeah, you would. But the thing is, I only saw 3 units there. He actually sent a lot more. He only sent those 3 units. I didn't see that Thor and those medivacs. If that had dropped, it would have done significant damage to my base before I would have even had time to respond to it, if I hadn't have scouted it first. And that essentially is the main benefit of the minimap. The minimap lets you see everywhere you have vision, whereas the triple monitor system only lets you see what's on the left and right of you if you have vision there. And that's pretty much why you can't call it an unfair advantage, because everybody has access to the minimap, and the minimap's power supersedes what you can get from the from a standard setup. So the only other advantage, as I said, was the ability to manage 2 bases at once, but I've already gone through that. You can pretty much do the same thing just as fast using the camera keys. And pretty much every professional match I've watched I've watched a handful of them, people's like training, pros training, the first thing they do is they bookmark all their bases. And then I've also watched tutorials from, I think it was Apollo, and the first thing he tells us to is bind in the map keys or bind in the camera keys, and then just bind all your base locations 1, 2, 3, 4 so you can switch them quickly. So properly using the camera control keys doesn't negate the advantage of effectively a multi-monitor system, but it does allow you a preference. So it's a way of doing the same thing, so it's a preference rather than an actual advantage. And I think that pretty much covers it. So if you actually look at the minimap again, I've actually spotted that he's going to try and counter me, because I've just attacked his base, so he was going to try and base trade me, so I've thrown a spanner in his works. But yeah, I think I pretty much covered it. That's basically my opinion. So yeah, while it does give advantages, the advantages all have parallels that are available to everyone anyway, so you can't call them unfair, because in order for them to be unfair, they would have to give you a significant advantage that other people don't have, but people can still do all of this. They just have to do it in a different way, so it's a preference rather than an advantage. But yeah, I think that covers it, so thank you for listening to me. Feel free to put your views or your comments in the comment section. Do bear in mind though, I'm a small channel, so if you're going to try and troll me and tell me how crap my gameplay is, or so like basically any unconstructive arguments, I will just outright delete, so don't waste your time. But otherwise, if you have any constructive feedback, if you have your own opinions, please feel free to let me know. If you want to point people at this video because effectively you've got into this argument, feel free, I'll happily take the flak for you. Also, if you happen to know any pros, or if you are a pro, I would very much like to know your opinion on this matter. I actually sent an email out to 10 different teams, effectively asking them their opinions on this without effectively giving mine or trying not to give mine. But I never got a reply from any of them. So if you are a pro or you know a professional player, then I'd love to hear from you. Other than that, I think that pretty much covers it. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you... Excuse me. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.